Hey everybody and welcome to another episode of the Disney Q&A. This is the series in which you guys send me all sorts of questions Disney related, whether it's about the parks or the movies or the video games or the history, and I try to give you answers to the best of my ability. I have 6 good questions today, so why beat around the bush when we could just dive right in? Our first question is regarding some recent news, and it comes from Copycat705, who asks, what are your thoughts on the recent changes in terms of security in the Florida parks? Recently, Disney has added more security in the form of metal detectors. Furthermore, Disney has stopped selling toy guns, and guests 14 and older are not allowed to wear costumes at all, even in special events. What do you think of all of this? So yes, if you haven't heard the news, this is actually something that happened pretty recently. They just added metal detectors, like the question asked out front. They changed their toy gun policy and their costume policy. And I mean, to address the elephant in the room, it's obviously a response to a lot of the shootings that have been going on around the world over the past couple of months. And, you know, what do I think about it? On one hand, of course, I'm glad that Disney's being proactive about making sure it is not only one of the happiest places on Earth, but the safest places on Earth. But of course, obviously, I think it's really unfortunate that we have to have stuff like this happen, that we have to have these security measures put in place. You know, obviously, Disney's the type of company that realizes that the cost of implementing all of this extra security is worth every penny, when the alternative might be the cost of something horrible happening at Disney. And so for that, I'm glad that they're taking extra steps. I think the more interesting talking point is in regards to the policy changes with the toy guns and with the costumes. The toy guns, I can see what their thought is behind that, right? You know, part of the reason they're adding the security is because of a lot of these shootings that have been going on, and there's a lot of talk going on about gun culture in the country and in the world, and you know, Disney is taking a stance that, you know, they don't want to support that culture and they don't want to sell little kids guns, and you know, I think there's arguments to be had on either side. Obviously, I come from an era where we grew up with toy guns, and you know, the crazy thing they did was add those little red plastic tips at the end, so they didn't look like real ones. You know, and I think it's such a large issue that there's no way in a Disney Q&A would we be able to tackle what the right or wrong choice was here. That said, I'm glad Disney is taking a stance one way or another, rather than just being sort of, you know, nebulous about it and just not avoiding the issue altogether. Now, the costume thing, that one's interesting. I guess ultimately that comes down to just, again, security and being able to identify guests in case something happens. And, you know, you don't want, I guess, a special event where people are walking around with masks on. Although I feel like the more reasonable policy change would just be no masks at all, even on special events. And that might actually have been the policy. I'm going to have to look into that. But that's the weirder one that I'm not 100% sure what they were thinking there. But for all we know, that could have been them just wanting that policy all along, and they're just slipping it in while they're making these other changes. But, you know, again, yeah, it's unfortunate, and I hope we can see a day again where they don't need those sort of things like the metal detectors. But that's obviously a much larger discussion beyond the realm of Disney. Our next question comes from Sarah DeCusion, who asks, hey Rob, Disney recently unveiled at the Space Mountain shop customizable magic bands. They also have purple magic bands now. What do you think of these, and do you think this means we could be seeing magic bands staying at the parks? So to the second half of your question, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there was a question at all as to whether or not they were going to stay or go. I think at this point, the amount of money invested in the system infrastructure for something like magic bands means that they've already made the decision that they're going to stay. You know, I think if they were going to cancel it, it would have been back when it was just for sort of getting into the parks, but now it's in FastPass Plus, it's for getting into your rooms, it's for paying for virtually everything. And as somebody who has just recently used magic bands for the first time in September and loves them, I'm glad that they're adding elements like customizable magic bands. I think that's great. I think that was something many Disney Q&As ago I mentioned being something that it felt like was missing. And so I love that they can give people more choice. And I think it's smart on their part because, one, I guess by putting it out later at this point, it doesn't look like as much of a cash grab as if they were like, hey, we have this new system, and by the way, you could buy all these magic bands. But on the other hand, it lets you personalize them and make them something more your Magic Band, right? And I think that will help people get used to the system and get familiar with the system. And I think now the next step is just see them integrated on the West Coast. Our next question comes from Lynn Ashley Ward, who asks, what is your opinion on the Disney Institute from the 90s and its failure? This was an interesting question, and this is one that I think could be a good topic for a Did You Know Disney? But yeah, the Disney Institute, if you don't know what it is, during the 90s, Michael Eisner had this idea for this Disney Institute, which was essentially you would go to Disney and added to all of the other things you could do at Disney, the theme parks, the water parks, golfing, all that sort of stuff, was Disney Institute. And they were classes you paid for to learn all sorts of different things. You know, obviously the most relatable ones would be something like animation, but they had other classes as well. And I think the premise was, hey, you know, vacations don't have to just be relaxing and going on rides. You could learn something out of them. I think the reason they failed is because the public doesn't want to go and learn something on a vacation. They want to go on vacation. And I think that's why it ultimately fell apart, which is, you know, it was a neat idea, but it's an extra cost on top of the cost of going to Disney World. And it's essentially, while they're cool ideas and cool lessons, it's school. You're going to school in Disney. And, you know, I think it's something like that might appeal to maybe more locals who are around more. But if you're a family of 4 who gets to go to Disney every couple of years, you're not going to want to spend some of that precious week or two, you know, taking classes on something. I think the smarter form of that stuff is stuff that you see like in Hollywood studios, or I guess now you see it in Disneyland, where you have like the 15-minute animation classes where you go in and they teach you how to draw a character and you walk out. And it's not the sort of thing you're going to put on a resume, but at the same time, you learn a little bit about it. And, you know, I think Walt Disney's entire MO was to educate through entertainment, and I think Disney Institute veered a little bit towards just pure education without the entertainment value, and so I don't think it was just a perfect fit for Disney, and I think that's why it went away. And you know what, even though it's something that didn't stick around, I'm glad that they tried it, and I'm glad that, you know, Michael Eisner wasn't afraid to just sort of rock the boat and give it a shot. And, you know, you learn from it, and I'm glad that they weren't afraid to shut it down when it didn't work. Our next question comes from Bowie Badger, who asks, what is your favorite Walt Disney World or Disneyland cue music? Oh man, I don't know why I threw this in there because I'm fairly certain I've answered it in some video somewhere, but I just like talking about it. My favorite cue music has to be for the Jungle Cruise in Adventureland in the Magic Kingdom. And that is because, one, it plays a lot of old-timey music that I really like and listen to. And two, I just really like the DJ. I just like all of the jokes and the puns, and it's a good way of setting the tone for the attraction and getting you in the mindset that you're going to have when you get on the boat and actually go through it. And my question for you all this week is, what is your favorite cue music from any of the parks? Doesn't have to be those two, any of them. Let me know in the comments below. I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Our next question comes from Benson37, who asks, since you spend a lot of money at Disney, do you think eating inside the parks is better or eating outside to save money is better? I need tips for my next Disney trip. So yeah, if you go on a Disney trip, you're spending a lot of money. I mean, that sort of comes with the territory of going to Disney, and food is no exception to that. Food is not the cheapest. I will say I'm probably come from a biased perspective because I live in New York City, and so the pricing of food in Disney World is actually not too far off from the pricing of food in like Manhattan. So the sticker shock isn't as drastic, but that said, it's just drastic in other ways. Like when I go elsewhere, like to Florida, and I see how cheap food is, I get blown away. But yeah, well, there's this question, is eating inside better or outside? And like most decisions at Disney, there are pros and cons to each. You know, you're thinking about cost purely in terms of dollars, which is obviously a very important way to think about cost. However, there's also cost, there's opportunity cost and time cost. And, you know, if you want to have lunch, is it worth, you know, getting everybody together, walking from, you know, Fantasyland to the entrance of the park, packing up into the parking lot and getting in your car and driving off property to sit down at, you know, a cheaper location, and then driving all the way back and getting back in the parks and then going back. So it's like using all of that extra time worth saving a couple of bucks on a meal at lunchtime to me personally, I'd say no, it's not really worth it because time is much more valuable to me. That said, that's not the only way that you can save money on food in the parks. You know, you could bring food in, I believe, unless they changed that recently too. And you can bring food onto property, obviously. All of these hotels have mini fridges, and what my parents would do when we went and we were trying to budget is we wouldn't eat every meal outside the parks or every meal inside the parks. We'd mix it up. So for instance, one of the things we would do is before going to Disney, because we would drive, is we would stop at a grocery store and pick up cold cuts and sandwich, just like sandwich fixings. And we would put it all in the mini fridge in the hotel. And so, yeah, 1 or 2 days at lunch, rather than leaving property completely, we would leave the park, head to our hotel, make sandwiches. We'd have sandwiches, hang out by the pool, and then head on to another park for the evening. And so there's one way that you save money. There are places, and we learned this recently back in 2012 when a big group of my friends and I stayed at the cabins of Fort Wilderness, is that you can get groceries delivered to your cabin. And that ended up being pretty cheap, and we did a similar thing where we did that. We had groceries delivered. Cabin had a bigger fridge, so we were able to stock more in there. We cooked one night. It was great because we're all friends, so we spent the time together watching movies. But that doesn't mean, that's all we did, right? You mix it up a little bit. And I think that just comes with budgeting for a Disney trip. When I budget for a trip, I try to decide, okay, how many times am I going to go to a nice sit-down restaurant? How many times am I going to go and, to a quick service? And then how many times am I going to try and save money? And then it's just a matter of deciding at any given moment when you want to do which one of those and just sticking to that. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to saving money when it comes to food at Disney, and there are a lot of options there. And our final question this week comes from Micah Calhoun, who asks, "Hey Rob, do you think Pixar is getting too much attention in the Disney World parks? I feel that Disney needs to give some respect to some of the classic movies like Lady and the Tramp, 101 Dalmatians, and perhaps even The Jungle Book. I personally feel that Disney is giving a little too much attention to Frozen and Pixar in general. Don't get me wrong, I love Pixar, but Disney, I feel, needs to calm down." This is another question that I feel like I get in some form or another every once in a while, and I like to address it just because I think it gets people thinking about the Disney more than just as like a dream maker and, experience crafter, but also a business. Yeah, I do think Pixar gets a lot more attention in those movies like The Jungle Book and 101 Dalmatians, but I don't think it's too much. I think I think Disney is being very reactionary. Disney didn't set out and go, okay, we're putting Frozen everywhere, and you're going to like it, and you have no option in this, and we've got all these plans for Frozen, and, welcome to our vision of Disney. No, they made a movie, and it did really well, and it did way better than they ever thought it would do, and people just kept asking for more Frozen, and more Frozen, and more Frozen, and Disney is giving that to them. And I think, you might personally be thinking to yourself, I wasn't asking for more Frozen, but you have to realize that for a whole young generation out there, Frozen is like the Snow White of their generation. It's all they can think about, and it was a game changer, and they love it, and Disney is just filling that need, and I don't think it's too much. I think, from a Disney fan perspective, sure, I think doing something, Lady and the Tramp related would be really neat, but from a business perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because there aren't a whole lot of people right now, fawning over Lady and the Tramp, and of course, obviously, that's a balance that Disney has to be very careful with. Otherwise, Magic Kingdom would just become Frozen Park, and it isn't. So they obviously are keeping a balance there. But again, that's also a smart business decision. They are knowledgeable about not putting all of their eggs in one basket, and they don't want one day people to just drop off on Frozen and then they're left with a whole bunch of stuff that is useless. But they're filling the need as it's there, and so I can't really say that I think it's too much or that they need to slow down or stop. I think what we need to do is recognize that Pixar is now part of the Disney family, just like Marvel is and just like Star Wars is. And I don't think it's weird to see it getting that treatment. I think back to some classic Disney rides, not like opening day stuff, but, think of stuff like Star Tours, which was around before Disney even owned Star Wars, or the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular. Or all or any of the movies in Great Movie Ride or the Twilight Zone. Like, there are all these properties that Disney doesn't even own that have found a home at Disney. And so I don't think the bulk of the attention needs to go to classic animations. I think really what you're looking for is ways to bring some of those classics back into the minds of people who maybe didn't experience them. And one of your examples there, The Jungle Book, is getting that treatment, right? Jon Favreau is making a Jungle Book movie, and that could be popular. And if it does well, we could see Jungle Book pop up in the parks more. And that's the path that I think things need to go down, not just picking an old arbitrary Disney film and trying to give it attention when there is nobody asking for it. It's about taking something old and saying, how can we make it new and refreshing and exciting for younger viewers? And then it will become popular. And, they tried that with Maleficent and Cinderella. And, it's weird because I think a lot of the same people who roll their eyes at Frozen and Pixar and wish some of these classics got attention are equally thinking the same thing when an older movie gets rebooted or brought back, without realizing that those reboots are the only way you're really logically going to see them return to the parks again. Because I can almost guarantee you, from a business perspective, you're not going to see Bob Iger just pick out Lady and the Tramp and say, we need to do something Lady and the Tramp. It's been a while. It's only going to be if there's a new Lady and the Tramp movie that everyone's talking about, or for some reason it becomes popular again. And it's just a matter of, again, it's all about balance. Everything's about balance. Maybe it's because I've just watched Star Wars recently. It's all about balance. Anyway, thank you all for your fantastic questions this week. I really enjoyed them. If you have a question for me, feel free to leave it in the comments below, or feel free to let me know on Twitter. I'm at RobPlays. I hope you all have a fantastic week. Whatever you're doing, make the most of it, because it makes it that much better. And I hope to see you all next time for the next Disney Q&A. Bye, everybody.